You're about to start a new job. You negotiated the salary, you read the offer letter twice, maybe even had a lawyer look at it. You feel prepared. But there's a window that opens the moment you walk through that door on day one, and it closes roughly 90 days later. What happens inside that window will determine the next 2 to 3 years of your career at that company, and almost nobody treats it that way. I'm Dre, and today I'm going to walk you through what's actually happening during your first 90 days at a new job, because it is not what you think it is. Most people believe the first 90 days are a grace period, a runway. Time to learn the systems, memorize names, figure out where the good coffee is. And on the surface, that's exactly what it looks like. Your manager tells you to take your time. HR sends you a welcome email with a checklist that includes things like set up your benefits portal and complete compliance training. Everything about the messaging says, relax, settle in, you've got time. And because the messaging is so consistent, so uniform across every company you've ever joined, you believe it. You take the 90 days at face value and assume the organization is being generous with your ramp. But here's what nobody explains to you. While you're settling in, a parallel process is running. Your manager has a file, or a spreadsheet, or a mental framework, and they are filling it in every single week. Not with your output. Not yet. You haven't been there long enough to produce meaningful output. They're filling it in with something far more subjective and far more permanent. Their read on you. Do you ask questions that signal you're building a mental model of the organization? Or do your questions signal that you're waiting to be told what to do? Do you handle ambiguity by leaning in, or do you freeze and escalate? When you don't know something in a meeting, do you say so with confidence, or do you hedge in a way that makes people wonder if you'll ever be direct? These are not things anyone will ever tell you they're watching for, but they are the things that determine whether your trajectory inside that company bends upward or flattens out before you even realize the evaluation happened. Let me explain why the 90-day structure exists in the first place. Because it's not arbitrary. In most employment agreements, the first 90 days carry a specific legal and financial architecture. Your benefits usually haven't fully vested. If the company offered equity, it almost certainly doesn't trigger until month 4, 5, or 6. And buried somewhere in your onboarding paperwork, there's a clause that says terminations within the first 90 days require minimal severance, sometimes none at all. You probably read that clause. Most people do. But most people read it as a formality, not as a structural signal. The company didn't give you 90 days to learn the job. They gave themselves 90 days to make a low-cost decision about whether to keep you. That's not cynical. That's just how organizational risk management works. Hiring is expensive. Onboarding is expensive. Training is expensive. And if the person they brought in isn't going to work out, the cheapest time to discover that is before the benefits vest, before the equity triggers, and before the severance clause kicks in. The 90 days are a risk window, and you're the variable being assessed. If you don't understand that framework, you will spend those 90 days optimizing for the wrong things. Here's what I mean by optimizing for the wrong things. Most new hires focus their first 3 months on absorption, learning the culture, memorizing the org chart, attending every meeting they're invited to, and a few they aren't, staying late to be visible, volunteering for tasks no one else wants. And all of that feels productive. It feels like you're demonstrating commitment, but none of that is what's actually being measured. What's being measured is fit. Not cultural fit in the vague HR-approved sense, fit in the operational sense. Does this person's judgment match the speed and style of this environment? When they encounter a problem they weren't briefed on, do they default to initiative or permission seeking? When they communicate upward, does the information arrive clean and structured, or does it require a second pass to be useful? These are the things that separate the people who get pulled into rooms from the people who get managed out of them. The uncomfortable truth is that the version of you that shows up during the first 90 days is a performance, and your manager knows it. Every experienced manager knows that new hires run slightly above their sustainable pace during onboarding. They display a little more initiative than they'll maintain long term. They suppress doubts they'd normally raise. They agree more than they naturally would. And good managers aren't fooled by this. They're calibrating for what the performance is hiding as much as what it's showing. They're watching what you do when the performance slips for a moment, when you're caught off guard, when you disagree with something but haven't decided yet whether it's safe to say so. That moment, the unscripted one, is worth more data to them than 6 weeks of polished behavior. So let me give you what I wish someone had given me years ago: the framework for how to actually navigate this window instead of sleepwalking through it. The first shift is understanding that the 90-day period is not low stakes. It is compressed, permanent stakes. Every interaction is being logged somewhere, formally or informally. Every email you send is a writing sample. Every meeting you attend is a behavioral sample. And once the picture forms in your manager's mind, it almost never gets reopened. That's the part that catches people. They assume there's a second evaluation, a reset, a chance to course correct later. There isn't. In most organizations, the 90-day read becomes the baseline, and everything after it is interpreted through that lens. You don't get a fresh start at month 4. You get the consequences of whatever impression solidified during months 1 through 3. The second shift is learning to read signals instead of just sending them. Most new hires are so focused on projecting competence that they forget to observe what's coming back at them. Your check-ins with your manager are one of the clearest signals available to you, and most people completely ignore what those check-ins are telling them. Are they getting longer or shorter? Are the questions getting more specific and collaborative, or are they staying surface level? Is your manager starting to share context you didn't ask for, pulling you into strategic conversations, mentioning upcoming projects and positioning you near them? Or are the check-ins flattening? Same length, same depth, same polite but non-committal language every time. If your check-ins are flattening, that is not neutral. That is a signal that the evaluation has stalled or turned negative, and no one is going to tell you that directly. You have to see it yourself. The third shift is understanding that the invisible metrics matter more than the visible ones. The visible metrics are in your onboarding checklist. Complete these trainings, hit these targets, attend these meetings. Those are table stakes. They're the minimum. Completing them doesn't set you apart. It just means you did what was expected. The invisible metrics are the ones that actually determine trajectory, and they're never written down anywhere. They include things like which senior stakeholders' attention you managed to earn in your first 2 weeks, whether your communication style in that first all hands registered as someone who adds signal or someone who adds noise, whether the first time you encountered a problem you couldn't solve, the way you handled it told the people watching something they hadn't expected, something that made them lean forward instead of leaning back. These moments are being cataloged in assessments you will never see, by people who will never tell you what they wrote. The fourth shift, and this is the one that changes everything, is to stop orienting yourself to the company and start orienting yourself to the company's decision about you. Most people spend 90 days learning how the organization works. Very few people spend those same 90 days learning how the organization is evaluating them. Who is actually watching? What are they watching for? What does a positive trajectory look like inside this specific company? Not in theory, but in practice. Who got promoted last year? And what did their first 90 days look like? Who left after a year? And what patterns were visible in hindsight? These are the questions that give you real leverage during the window that matters most. And they're the questions that almost no one thinks to ask because everyone is too busy trying to prove they belong, instead of learning how belonging is actually measured. Because here's what happens when you don't do this. You pass the 90-day mark and everything feels fine. Your manager says you're settling in. You get positive but vague feedback. You assume that means you're on track. But 6 months later, you notice something. A project review happens without you. A meeting gets scheduled, and you're not on the invite. Your scope starts shrinking, not through any formal conversation, but through the quiet removal of responsibilities. Your title stays the same, but the architecture of your role is being disassembled around you by people who decided months ago that you weren't the long-term answer. And by the time you realize what happened, you've been managed out slowly enough that there's nothing to appeal, no decision to challenge, no moment you can point to and say, that's where it went wrong. It went wrong in the first 90 days. You just didn't see it happening. The 90-day period at any company is not orientation. It's an audition that looks like orientation. And the people who move fastest through organizations are the ones who understood that distinction before they walked in the door. Treat those 90 days like what they are, the most important evaluation window of your career at that company, and you give yourself a real chance to shape the outcome instead of discovering it after it's already been decided for you. If this changed how you think about starting a new role, subscribe. I break down the professional and financial frameworks that nobody explains to you until it's too late. I'll see you in the next one.